When most of us think of fraternities, these images come to mind. But there's much more. They develop leaders, promote brotherhood, academic excellence, and a call to service. This is true of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated and one man in particular, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
While we were in the process of organizing our pledge group, we were informed that there was going to be a theology major. So we were intimidated, felt we're not going to be able to have as much fun.
It was thanks to Alpha Phi Alpha that I met Martin Luther King.
I was General Secretary of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity. One of our initiatives was the 50th anniversary of the birth of the fraternity. He wasn't very well known at that moment, but when he finished talking that Sunday afternoon to that packed audience, everybody knew who Dr. King was when we got through.
Hi, I'm Hill Harper, and it's been 60 years since global human rights icon Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. answered the call and became part of the pioneering brotherhood of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. After over a century of activism and leadership, the fraternity stands tall as our brother is forever immortalized with the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. Tonight, in this BET News special, you will hear the untold story of Dr. King's life as an Alpha Phi Alpha brother and how our pioneering brotherhood helped him launch the first battles of the civil rights movement.
The year was 1952. Jazz great Duke Ellington ruled the day. Elsewhere, publishing mogul John H. Johnson celebrated the one-year anniversary of Jet magazine. And attorney Thurgood Marshall was arguing Brown versus Board of Education. All of these successful men were members of Alpha Phi Alpha, the first black Greek letter fraternity. And then a new pledge, 23-year-old Martin Luther King Jr., a PhD student studying theology, would indelibly change the brotherhood, the country, and the world. I traveled to Boston to meet one of the only surviving men that pledged with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
How do you know Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.?
First met him actually in 1952. I was a sophomore at Brandeis University, struggling through actually being the first and only black male student there at the time.
Do you actually remember the first time you met Dr.
Yes,
King?
I do, believe it or not. The fraternity, the pledge group, met at my grandfather's house. One of the last people to show up again was Dr. King. We were very interested to see how the other brothers would, big brothers, would actually treat him and how they would treat us differently since he was around the same age as the brothers.
I have a photo here. You're in this photo. Dr. King is in this photo.
Yes.
And he seems to be, you know, we think of him as such a big man in terms of his stature, but he seems to be the smallest of you guys. Was he number one in the line? And he's beaming here. He's smiling brightly. Was that generally his demeanor?
We're impressed with him as a serious person. But for this particular photograph, again, we were, first of all, glad to get it over with.
Now, is that when you crossed the burning sands?
No, this was before.
This is before.
This is part of the requirements for us to complete the burning sands. So this is one of the tortures that we had to go through, basically, by wearing the full dress mourning suits and in order to have us realize our own humility.
As we say in Alpha, he saw the light. And because of that, I think he met men who were alphas, and he admired something within the fraternity that in the spring and early summer of 1952, June 22nd to be exact, he was initiated into the fraternity.
I have here in my hand, it reads, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, let it be known that Martin King is a duly initiated member of Sigma Chapter, signed by the General Secretary here, James Huger.
Yes, sir.
So this would be your signature, sir.
That is my signature.
When this was signed, had you heard of this Martin King? Had people been talking about it, or he was just another inductee?
He was just another inductee when I signed that.
Just another inductee when you signed that. Did you get a sense that he was destined for any type of extraordinary greatness, or was he similar to you know, the other brothers, just really great leaders, etc. Was there any type of special sense that you got at any point that said, wow, this is something different going on here. This man could change the world?
There was a kind of a spiritual aura about him, even from the first time that I met him, that kind of set him aside. Whether it was because of the fact that of his age, or whether it was because of this particular aura that he seemed to have.
With his newfound affiliation with the fraternity, Martin Luther King Jr. and his Alpha brothers began pondering how they can improve the basic rights of Black Americans. Coming up next, King and Alpha in the battle for racial equality in Montgomery.
I got in my car with a couple of guys and drove to Montgomery because I wanted to see how he was making the boycott work.
There are 4 Dr. King principles upon which this amazing memorial is built upon: democracy, hope, justice, and love. He's given us a legacy of courage, a legacy of righteousness, a legacy upon which we can build, and we must build.
In 1953, Martin Luther King Jr. married Coretta Scott. The couple moved from Boston to Montgomery, Alabama. He began pastoring the Dexter Avenue Church and was thrust into the forefront of the famous Montgomery bus boycott.
First met Martin when he organized the boycott in Montgomery. I got in my car with a couple of guys and drove to Montgomery because I wanted to see how he was making the boycott work. That was not an easy job to get black folk to boycott, but he got them to do it.
And my understanding is this is the Brotherhood of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated giving Dr. King a check.
Phone rang. It was Frank Stanley. He said, Jimmy, they just arrested Martin, and I want you to come up with an idea when they have his trial to let America know that Alpha Phi Alpha stands 100% behind Martin Luther King. Then somebody said, just to go down there and sit with him doesn't make any sense. Take some money to help him.
And in a very poignant letter that Dr. King wrote, he said nothing moved him more than to look in that courtroom and to look in the back and to see his general president and members of the fraternity in that courtroom.
But we were sitting right down below Dr. King, so that he could just look at us right like this. Being born and raised in the South, I'd heard every name in a book that we could be called. You know, I've seen the action that we've had. I've seen people that had been lynched. I saw all of these things, so I was not surprised that they at no time ever said Dr. King or Reverend King or gave him any kind of respect. But I wasn't prepared. One of the lawyers said, that Negro. We said, well, let's get the hell out of here. You know, Martin was looking at us, and he realized what we were about to do. He reached over and said, cool it, brothers, cool it. He said, this too shall pass. Now that took the wind out of our sails completely.
With the boycott in full swing, Dr. King was asked to speak at the 50th anniversary convention of Alpha Phi Alpha, which was attended by the remaining living fraternity founders. King's speech was entitled, The Birth of a New Age. This rare look inside that day in 1956 has never been broadcast.
We will be able to move into this new world, a world in which men will live together as brothers.
One of our initiatives was the 50th anniversary of the birth of the fraternity. Well, he wasn't very well known at that moment. But when he finished talking that Sunday afternoon to that packed audience, everybody knew who Dr. King was.
Actually, it was thanks to Alpha Phi Alpha that I met Martin Luther King. I had bumped into him casually and I had shaken hands with him after speeches. But we both got invited to Talladega College by the Alpha chapter there. And I always said that they invited him because he was already famous, and they didn't think he would come, so they invited me as a backup. But we both showed up.
Dr. King and Brother King vicariously inspired a movement in the hearts and minds of brothers across the country from 1956 until his death. And I think it may have been particularly evident during the student sit-ins when Alpha men, along with other students, courageously sat in and picketed and protested and marched to gain access and equal rights as a part of their civil rights.
Racial equality now seemed possible in the minds of African Americans. Dr. King answered the call and became the leader of a movement that transformed human rights activism around the world.
There wasn't a problem with being nonviolent. We knew that violence would get you killed quick. I mean, here's a small army of people with shotguns, with tear gas, with horses, and we got women and children. We never had as many men in a march as we had women and children. I said, any night we have 25 black men in the march, I guarantee you there won't be any violence. They said, what do you mean? I said, these guys, they take advantage of picking on women and children. And so when we finally got the men marching, the violence petered out.
Coming up, the hidden hand of Alpha in the civil rights movement.
I don't believe I ever once gave Martin Luther King the Alpha handshake.